Hi, this is Patsy with a Z. Welcome to Joy on Paper Live. Today is a very special day. I have a guest host. Bria Burton is going to be taking over the show for me, and she loves it. She started taking over one day a month for a sci fi hour on Joy on Paper, the radio program, and we have had so much fun with that. She has done such wonderful interviews, including one with Lou Diamond Phillips. And so we're just having so much fun. I met her because she came to the studio to promote her own book. She's a wonderful writer. And I was so thrilled when I met her. I said, "Oh my goodness, with that voice, you have to be on the radio." So next thing you know, I had her on the radio, and of course, I advertised her, and she was in the newspapers. I think we had her story in over 100 newspapers around the country because she is just so talented. And today, she's taking over the program, and she's going to be interviewing three of the authors from what is called the Alvarium experiment, and they do sci-fi books. They're all wonderful sci-fi writers, and so she's taking over the program. And I will give her a little introduction, and then she's going to just jump right in and talk to Ken Pelham, Elle Andrews, Patt, and Charles Cornell. So right now, let's get set, and we're going to take off on the spaceship. This is my spaceship. It is the Joy on Paper live spaceship. So enjoy this interview. And then at the end, I have a few messages and a few funny videos for you. I am Patsy with a Z, and I am so happy to introduce Bria Burton, who is going to be discussing the book and introducing all of the authors. Bria Burton is right here, and she is a correspondent and also a guest host on Joy on Paper. She is doing the Joy on Paper Sci-Fi Hour on the radio. And so I'm so happy to welcome you, Bria. Please tell us a little bit about yourself and your book, and then you can introduce everybody else.
Yes, hi Patsy. Thank you so much for having me here for this very special show with my fellow Alvarium Experiment authors. I am Bria Burton, and I've had the privilege of being a special correspondent for Joy on Paper to bring you science fiction book buzzes. And once a month, I get to host a special science fiction themed hour at the radio show. I also have my own books, and here is one of my short stories that is featured in the light fantastic anthology that we did together, the Alvarium Experiment. It's called Backlash, Frontlash, Whiplash, and it is a very sci-fi heavy story with an artificial intelligence that doesn't behave the way she's supposed to. I also have some books that are inspirational. I have a story about girls running. I have pet stories about my dog and cat. But my true love really is sci fi fantasy, and I have quite a few published short fiction in the genres. So I would also love to introduce my fellow Alvarium authors who are here. And we're going to start with Charles A. Cornell. Charles, please say hello and tell everyone a little bit about yourself.
Hi there. Yes, I'm a British Canadian. I live in England. I retired to England. I live in a small village in a place called North Lincolnshire. I've been writing for about 20 years, and I specialize in speculative fiction, science fantasy. I also do steampunk. One of the books that I published is called Dragonfly, which is a blend of science fiction and fantasy. It has a unique airplane that I had a creative artist designed for me called the Dragonfly, and it's set in an alternative World War II. I also have a number of short stories in the Alvarium Experiment anthologies, and I'm very glad to be here.
Wonderful. Thank you, Charles. And next, I would love to introduce Elle Andrews Patt. Elle, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, I'm Elle Andrews Patt, and Ken Pelham and Charles Cornell invited me to join the Alvarian experiment at the very beginning, and I have five short stories in the five of the six anthologies. I also write a murder mystery series with Ghost. The first book in the series is that cover there. It's called Ghost. I have learned so much from the Alvarium experiment authors that I have a side career now, formatting and publishing other authors, and had taken over the publishing of the anthologies from Charles a few years ago under Blue Beach Press. So I get to work with all the authors, and it's just been a fantastic experience.
Wonderful. And last but certainly not least, we have Ken Pelham. Ken, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you, Bria. I live in Maitland, which is a little community just north of Orlando, Florida. I've been writing in the various, what I consider all the suspense genres: science fiction, thriller, mystery, crime, horror, all those things I like to dabble in, mostly focusing around thrillers in my novels, at least. I've been doing this many years. Met Charles in the Florida Writers Association in about 2013 or so, or 2012, and we just kept in touch. I was impressed by the work that he did. What drew me to his work was he always seemed to think outside the box. So when I started coming up with an idea for an anthology, I approached Charles first because I knew he would think outside the box. So fortunately, he didn't cut off all communication at that point, and we kept in touch and just started cooking up the idea, the premise for the first of these anthologies, and then set out to recruit rather than coerce people into joining the group. So that's where we are today, and I'm very happy to see everyone again.
Okay, we've had a chance to meet all of the authors here, and I want to direct this first question at Charles, who you have been our cover artist for each of these anthologies. Can you talk a little bit about that process?
Yes, sure. I got into cover design because when I first started out as an author, my first published book, I did what virtually everybody who self-publishes does, which is to hire a lot of people to do the work for you. Writing is enough, and learning how to write is obviously the primary objective of every writer who's learning. But there's so much more to publishing, and it includes formatting, which Elle will talk about, as well as cover design and publishing and marketing and everything else. And so when I first started out, I hired people to do stuff, and it turned out very, very expensive. So I thought to myself, well, there must be an easier way. So I taught myself Photoshop, and the covers that you see there are all done in Photoshop. They're done in what's called photo montage, which basically means that they can be either single photograph or a single image or combinations of images that are superimposed and manipulated in ways in which you can alter the shading and what shows and what doesn't show, etc. And then I also learned how to do the titling. So it was a great process. All of the Alvarium experiment authors published their individual stories, relatively inexpensive, I think, to sample any of these stories from any of these anthologies. They asked me to produce individual book covers for them, essentially ebook covers, which I did. And so far, I think I've added up to about 80 different ebook covers that I've done. And it's been a great process for me because I do it for free, and I just do it because I want to expand my network of author friends. It's helped me to do that and exchange my services for help with my books and editing. I know Ken's done a lot of editing for me, which is great. It's a lot of fun. And I think that a lot of self-published authors are struggling right now with the costs. I know that editing in particular. And so it's very helpful to have a network of people. And I think we've grown our grouping of authors. We started out with, I believe it was 12 authors on the first anthology, the Prometheus Saga. We added more authors and others dropped out. And over time, I think it's close to 20 different authors that have participated in the 6 anthologies we've published. So it's a nice little network to have.
Yes, it's been wonderful to be part of. And Elle, will you talk a little bit about the publishing side that you mentioned?
Oh, absolutely. Actually, I learned how to format from Brie because, as Charles mentioned, we publish each of our stories individually. And then several months later, we collect them together as an anthology. And we want the stories to all have a consistent look so that they can be recognizable as an Alvarium experiment story for a particular anthology. So I learned formatting in Word from Bria. Since then, I've learned how to format in Vellum and InDesign, and took over publishing the anthologies from Charles a couple of years ago. It's very, very rewarding to be able to work with these authors. Amazon requires that we have permissions for copyrights for the anthology. So I work directly with every author to get those contracts. And we publish each anthology as a paperback so that we can each sell them in person when we meet our readers at book festivals and craft fairs and stuff like that. It's just been a great process, and having 20 some authors to network with. We write, get all our editing done among us. Charles does all our covers, and they're all just beautiful. When we put the book together, I work directly with Charles on getting the full book cover because you have to have a back cover blurb and all that. It's actually also been a very democratic process because we have a big email chain and go through how we want the blurb written and how we want the forward written and how everybody wants their credits done. It's just very cool. I've really
Yeah.
enjoyed it. It's allowed me to learn a lot about self publishing and working on my own books and offer those services to other authors.
And Ken, I know at the very beginning, you and Charles talk a little bit about the start of it all. You two, I believe you talked about meeting at the FWA conference. And then what about this very first anthology we did? Who came up with the idea for the premise for the Prometheus saga?
I'd love to take total credit for the idea, but it was very much a collaborative effort between Charles and myself after we came up with the idea of how the structure of the group itself. And we were both on the same page with that. We just started throwing ideas back and forth at each other. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Charles, but over the course of about 4 days of furious emailing back and forth, idea after idea, we just kept narrowing down the
Yeah.
concept of the Prometheus saga and went from there before we pitched it to the others at the conference and through emails and other contacts. It was quite a collaboration, and I think it came off pretty well. We came up with what I think was a pretty original idea, both in the structure of the group and in the concept of the Prometheus saga. That's basically Prometheus is a character who has been here since the dawn of Homo sapiens, about 40,000 years existence on Earth. But he is not a human. He's basically an immortal human, although he's not really human. He's made of the flesh and bones of our DNA, but he's a probe sent here by an alien civilization. He or she, because he can take on any guise as a human and regenerate himself or herself into whatever gender or time to blend in with that society and learn about what Earth humans are doing and report that back to the alien civilization, whatever it may be. We don't know. We never describe what it is, and report to them, keeping an eye on us, which is basically what human civilizations and cultures do here. They keep an eye on what may be enemies or collaborators in the future. So that's basically what they're doing. The group seemed to buy into it right away, and we went from there. So it was very much a lot of fun.
And it really was an experiment. I know Charles has mentioned the idea of our hive. So, alvarium is Latin for beehive. And it truly is, as Elle described, all of us working together to get these anthologies put together, to get the stories together, to get the final formatting and print editions and covers and all those things. When anybody watching is looking at this photo, you'll see we have the Prometheus Saga Volume 1 and Volume 2. We have Return to Earth, which stands alone. We have The Masters Reimagined 1 and 2 volumes, and then The Light Fantastic. So we got started with book number 1, the Prometheus Saga, kind of wondering how is this going to go? And it really did go so well that we had to just keep going together. And Charles, I'm going to come back to you. Can you talk a little bit about the continuation, about moving into the next anthology? So, for example, we went into Return to Earth as our very next anthology after the Prometheus saga. What are some of the things you felt like you learned after we were getting that very first anthology done, figuring out that we could actually do this?
Right. Sure. I think it's important also to say that one of the things that we tried to do with these anthologies, which sort of we hope broke a bit of a mold, is that if you think about traditionally published anthologies, they're what I would call thematic. So if you had an editor who wanted to do a science fiction anthology, maybe about robots or about first contact with extraterrestrials, or if it was a fantasy anthology, you would look for, I want stories about vampires, or I want a theme of dragons. We didn't take that route. What we did, which was unique, is we actually created a premise that everybody had to follow. And Ken has explained the premise of the Prometheus saga, which was an alien probe sent to Earth, observing us through history. So the task ahead for all of the authors was to take a period of history and show how this probe would react and interact with people in that time period. And in our very first anthology, we went from literally prehistory to modern day. And we thought that it was so exciting to do. I mean, obviously, history, there's so many stories that we did it again in the Prometheus Saga Part
Hmm.
2. So we've covered things like the American Revolution and world exploration and World War II and the Holocaust. We've done just so many different. I think someone did something in ancient Greece, someone did something in ancient China. And so we were able to do that because we constructed a premise. And the other thing that was important about it was that the authors didn't know what the other authors had written. So if, for example, you were submitting a story on robots and you wrote the story about a robot, it would be up to the editor to read your story and see if there was a conflict with another author, that maybe there's some overlap in the storyline or the plot line, or the stories were just too similar to be in the same
Hmm.
anthology, and maybe they would then select which would be the best robot stories. But in our case, we made sure that we didn't overlap in the time periods for Prometheus Saga 1 and 2. And because of that, and we kind of declared to each other what time period we were writing in, we were free to express ourselves in whatever way we saw that period of time. In Return to Earth, the premise that we set was that all the stories had to be about first contact with extraterrestrials. But the twist was that the extraterrestrials had to be humans returning to Earth. So that really begs the question, why are we making first contact with humans? Where did they go? Why are they coming back to Earth? And that is, when you think about it, it's very difficult to try to come up with some
Hmm.
story ideas, but
Yeah.
we did. We managed to do that. In the Masters Reimagined, those two volumes, the first volume had to
Yeah.
do with classical stories and a retelling in speculative fiction about the classics. In Masters 2, we looked at art, and it could be any kind of art. The cover shows Rodin's Thinker. It could be painting. Take a painting or a piece of art and write a story about it, but in a speculative way. And any of the genres were available, from science fiction, fantasy, horror, the paranormal, etc. And then the final one, the light fantastic, we kind of just opened it up to anything that was funny. That was probably our easiest premise. But what did we learn? Well, first of all, I got to tell
Yeah.
you that I'd never written a short story before the Prometheus. And so a lot of us were now forced into doing something out of our comfort zone. It's funny to say that short stories are out of your comfort zone, but when you look at it, you have very limited time to craft both the plot and the characters. And it really tests your ability to do both. And it's very, through each anthology, as we've gone to whatever challenge we put forward to the other authors, not only have we challenged ourselves to learn a little bit more about how we write and how we construct our stories, but also because we publish all of the stories on the same day, we don't know what the other stories are and how they've interpreted the premise. And so by reading other people's stories, you start to learn about storytelling and how different authors can interpret things differently, even though they've been given the same premise. And that has all kinds of applications in your writing.
And Elle, I was thinking about how you mentioned participating in 5 out of the 6 anthologies. So, how has your writing, because Charles has gotten into a little bit of just dabbling into short fiction, pushed him a little bit as a writer. Talk a little bit about what your stories did for you in your writing as you contributed to each of these anthologies that you were part of.
I started publishing short fiction a year or 2 years before the Alvarium experience uh, formed. So I was used to writing short fiction, and this really let me expand my range and see the width of the genre that I could continue to write speculative fiction and twist it in all sorts of ways. The inspiration of the other stories that I read as we built these anthologies was just amazing. There is no way that you could ever run out of storytelling. We could actually expand these anthologies several times over, and you would still have very unique uh,
Mhm.
stories coming out of this very simple concept of things like Return to Earth, or write about this classic piece of art. The range is just incredible, it's limitless. So even if you just took your one thing, you could make a whole career out of just writing speculative fiction based on one of these premises. It is very, very cool. So I truly improved my craft, and the depth. I say that depth, but the depth of the story, you can make it as detailed as your craft will allow, as your writing skill will allow. That's what really got me on these anthologies, is that it is such a different way to do it, rather than just to say, all these stories are going to be about robots or dragons. It just opens the world up so much. The craft of short fiction, um, learning that better through the Alvarium experiment actually allowed me to start crafting more commercial novels. I had a couple of trunk novels, but the craft that I learned in writing these particular stories allowed me to expand to novels. It gave me a lot more confidence in my work. Even though I was winning awards, I had no feedback until I had this network of authors who said, yes, you're, able to write these stories. And not only that, but we're going to give you more knowledge of how to go about publishing them. As we started as a marketing group so that we could all work together. Again, I all I can say is that I everything that I've learned about self-publishing is from this group, and it's just been fantastic. It's allowed me a lot of success.
That is so incredible. And Ken, speaking of awards, I wanted to just talk about how so many of these stories, including yours, have won awards, and talk a little bit about that piece of it where we get to come together at the FWA conference, for example, and we have a group of us that we're cheering each other on at the same table, and then some of us winning awards for these stories. Tell us about that aspect of what it was like, uh, moving toward these stories aren't just put together the anthology, they're actually winning awards.
Well, actually, that was one of our tactics from the very start. we we encouraged all the authors. You know, first of all, we made it clear that participating in this anthology, after that, say after a short period of time, you're welcome to publish it anywhere else. But we also encouraged everyone to try and submit their work to awards competitions, and we felt very strongly that we do quite well. But that was part of the marketing strategy. We're going to get these out there, we're going to win awards, and we're going to keep that ball rolling. And I'm happy to say that I don't know the last count, but a lot of these stories have won awards, and there's been a lot of good reviews of the collections as a whole and individual stories. So it just kind of took over from there. So we want to have always encouraged that and encourage people to keep their work and publish it elsewhere too, because that helps all of us. It gets the word out. One thing about each one of the stories, if you buy it online, it's for 99 cents. at the end of it, hey, there's a link to all the other stories in the same anthology and to that person's website for their individual work. So it's been kind of a collaborative effort in that regard that we wanted everybody to help promote each other's work and keep that going. But yeah, the awards were certainly a nice benefit to come from that.
Ken, just along that thread of marketing, you have led writing workshops, you have done some different things in speaking engagements. How has being part of the Alvarium experiment helped with some of that for you as an author?
As both the others have all said here, that it's helped me develop as a writer, kept me it gives us a deadline. We've all got our own separate projects going. So all of a sudden you drop this in the middle of your other project. That takes a leap of faith from each individual author. Okay, now I got to keep these balls all in the air here. It's so there's a little bit of juggling act to get them all done on time. And sometimes we intentionally give ourselves a short deadline because if you don't, people wait to the last minute and then crank something out. So that's also a nasty little tactic that we throw in there. Keep the deadline short and so make sure the projects get done on time. But yeah, working, I've always, I'm not an outgoing person by nature. So many years ago in my working career, I decided, I'm going to get out there whenever there's a presentation to be done. I'm going to be the one at work to volunteer to do it. So I kept that going in writing too, and always developing new presentations and things that I could do that would help other writers learn how to write, the craft of writing. There's too many books that you'll see online and how to make $1 million in your first week as a freelance writer. It just doesn't work that way. What I've tried to do is put out books that help people learn the craft of writing, whether it's suspense. I have a presentation that's very popular that I do on point of view, which um, I wished I had gotten that when I was first starting out because it took me years of learning it the hard way, how to do correct point of view and voice from the characters' perspectives in a book. So, um, fortunately, working on short stories and novellas, because some of these have grown, the author would try to keep them into a certain range, but the stories sometimes take a life of their own. We don't want to limit that. And so it helps you develop craft at different levels. And I think even some of us here, I think Charles is one, took his short story that he wrote for the Alvarium, and then it's turned it into a novel series. A couple of the authors here have done that. They were so happy with the work that they'd done as a short story to just keep it going. We also have always encouraged all the authors bring in your own universal characters that might be outside if you want. Bring them into this. That's also a way to promote your own work within the framework of each individual anthology. So I think it's been just a great effort all around, and everybody's bought into it. So that it's very nice that way.
That is so true. And Charles, why don't you go ahead and tell us about the story that led you to go from an Alvarium experiment short story to this novel that you're working on?
Well, I've really focused my writing in the last couple of years on science fiction. I've done some steampunk and what's called diesel punk, which is what Dragonfly would be classed as, and they were great. I did my own anthology of steampunk stories, but I started to think about science fiction and what I was seeing in the marketplace. And to be frank, there's a lot of stuff out there that seems to be very repetitive. And I'd written a story for Return to Earth called Children of the Stars. And it was uh, about some medical researchers who discovered that there were women with superhuman fertility. They were having babies very quickly within 4 months and up to an age of 80 or even older. And it all had to do with extraterrestrials and the fact that these women were being abducted. And the return to Earth part of it was that they were returning to Earth pregnant and giving birth to twins at a rapid rate. So I thought to myself, well, I could do something about that. And so I started writing the first novel, full length novel, that the short story is actually the kind of prequel or the foundation novel. And it followed one of the medical researchers into the future. Now I have an idea that's expanded beyond the original. It involves uh, the future of climate change. It involves the future of artificial intelligence and genetic engineering. And then I started to realize that in science fiction, we often leap from Earth to the stars. If you think about it, when you get into like space opera or something like that, space colonization, there's a lot of stories out there about civilizations that exist in 1,000 years from now that maybe they were human beings who colonized another planet very far away. Star Wars is an example of that. And I thought to myself, you know what? We've never really explained how we got there. And so I've got a series of novels coming out that I'm hoping to step forward from the Earth to the moon to the stars and using the children of the stars as the foundation. And essentially, because these aliens are not benevolent people, they're actually malevolent people, a malevolent civilization. The first thing we have to do is defend ourselves against them. And the way we do that is by re engineering our human genome. That's the only way that we can resist all of the things that they are bringing to Earth to basically take over the Earth. And because of that, we then become better equipped for space travel. So the whole series of books, it doesn't happen in one book, it happens over 3 or 4 different books where our human genome changes to the point where we can survive cosmic radiation and our immune system's better for infections. And there's some, combinations with artificial intelligence and so forth. So that whole series is, I'm now working on 3 novels. The first one is almost ready for publication, but I want to make sure that all 3 are out before I do that. All comes from a short story in Return to Earth.
That is so incredible that, yes, like you just said, it came from one short story. Now you've got a 3-book series that's on the way. Elle, I want to take a look at one of your stories. So when you look at each anthology, would you say you had a favorite of the short stories that you wrote for us? And will you tell us a little bit about it?
Oh, I really liked both my Masters Reimagined stories. And the first one is regarding Mr. Bulkington, and it's based on Moby Dick. And because we were all picking classic literature, I'd never read Moby Dick. So I had no idea how amusing it was. And it really struck me the sense of humor in it. And to have a character in the early chapters that Melville never followed up on. He never shows up again after this first chapter where he walks into the Spatter Inn and gets hired as the pilot for the Pequod. And then they drop him, and he writes this, like, epic uh, monument to the pilot, and how the earth scorches his feet, and about how he's part of the sea. And my speculative take on that was, well, I don't want to give it away, but that he was a mythical creature who is tied to Ahab, and Ahab uses the skills that he has in Moby Dick. And it was kind of a revelation how you could fit. I'd written a lot of fanfic before I started publishing original fic, and it was a sandbox I was familiar with. To take that huge big novel and write a short story that told the story of this character was just, it was so much fun. And people who read it, and you don't even have to know the story of Moby Dick beyond they're after a white whale, and get this twist of an ending is just, I still love it. I still love that story. And I really enjoyed writing the voice. Um, but I also wanted to add that Return to Earth gave me a novel as well, with one of the failed short stories that I first offered, because it was such a big short story and it had so much in it. And Bria, you probably remember it because you were like, "Wow, this is just too much." And I have 50,000 words on this, space epic now, because of Return to Earth, and that involves, the Bermuda Triangle and all that
Mhm.
kind of stuff. So it's just fun. Your brain, you really get a lot of thinky thoughts um, working this way, and having other people say, well, what if you do this? What could you do with that? And then you go and you squirrel yourself away with a pen and paper and you go, I could write about this or that or whatever. And it just gives you so much creative space to move around in. I never knew really what speculative fiction was until this group. So, and it's just taking one element and putting it in the real world and making it believable. And it's just amazing. So I've just had a lot of fun with it.
Ken, I have the exact same question for you. Out of these anthologies that we've done together with the Alvarium experiment, what is your favorite story that you wrote?
Well, that's actually when you asked that to the others, I was thinking, I think my favorite would be from the Masters Reimagined 2, which was our anthology based on classic works of art. My story in that, and it's a pretty long, I guess you would call it a novella. It's called The Medusa Jump, and it's based on the art, the giant painting by Theodore Géricault, which hangs in the Louvre, The Raft of the Medusa. Now, the Raft of the Medusa was based on an actual historic event that happened following the French Revolution, and it already much anger afoot in France with what happened with the collapse of the revolution and what they call the restoration of the crown. Theodore Géricault took this incident in which the Medusa was a ship. It was on its way to a French colony in Africa, and it ran aground due to gross incompetence because the powers that be had people the ship with officers that were just given these jobs basically as favors, for their loyalty to the restoration of the crown. So my story is based on time travelers from the future going back to witness this event, and I just loved everything. The research going into to the story was fascinating. I learned more about French history than I had ever imagined I would get into when I started that. But I had been enamored of this painting since the early 1980s when I was in Paris. I visited the Louvre and I'd seen this picture of the painting in many books before, but when you see it in person, it takes up a whole wall. It's enormous and it's just breathtaking. So I've always had it in the back of the mind. And when we came up with the idea for this anthology, I quickly decided on Raft of the Medusa as the basis of my story. So that was an easy choice for me, although I am happy with all the stories I've done with the group.
Bria, we
And
have to
I will go
ask
ahead and share
the
my
question,
favorite.
what's your favorite story?
Oh, that's exactly where I was going to go.
Yeah, go ahead.
So it's
Yeah,
kind of
we
hard
want
to.
to hear from you.
I really did enjoy each story that I wrote. The first two Prometheus Saga volumes, I wrote American History Story, which is one of my favorite time periods historically. I had a lot of fun writing in the Masters Reimagined as well. But I'm going to focus on our very latest anthology with Backlash, Frontlash, Whiplash. The Light Fantastic was one of probably my favorite ideas of just the pandemic had happened and we all came together and said, let's make people laugh now. And so I had this idea of an artificial intelligence that basically it's a hologram, and she was created for the purpose of helping support people in their social media, in their status online. And this software engineer creates this hologram and names her one thing, but then as soon as the hologram comes into being, she's like, oh, no, 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 my name is Cricket and I'm calling the shots. So I had so much fun writing that story and telling what happens when AI doesn't do what it's programmed to do. So that story, I will say, had to be one of my favorites. Actually, you all could probably speak to this. Writing humor is a lot more challenging than I thought it would be, because things that I think are funny, maybe other people don't think that. Being able to write this story that potentially would make people laugh or would even just give your funny bone even just the slightest tickle. That was my goal as I was writing about this character, Cricket. And she ended up taking over my Facebook profile. If you follow me on social media, Cricket is in charge of my Facebook profile. And she will post things about being an AI who is better than everybody else, including her human, which is me. That's also been a lot of fun to just bring that into kind of a marketing aspect and being able to turn that into something beyond just the short story. I do have other short story ideas in the Cricket universe. I'm going to hopefully continue the saga with her. Again, we've all said it. Very special piece of being part of this collaboration is taking away so many things with our own writing and being able to go somewhere that maybe we didn't expect with it. And Patsy, I just want to thank you so much for having us on your show. This has been fantastic to talk to Charles, Elle, and Ken. And what an honor to be here. And I think that pretty much wraps us up. So I'll hand it over to you, Patsy.
So I'm so happy to have all of you on because it is so wonderful the way that you've gotten together, written these wonderful books. The stories are just fantastic. As I look forward to Mother's Day and Father's Day, anthologies are perfect gifts. You all have such clever ideas. You're all so talented. And I just wanted to prove to everybody that there are real authors out there and that you are not AI and you come up with all these ideas and your heads are full of characters. And with sci fi authors, a lot of very strange characters live in your heads.
For sure.
Okay. Why don't we go through and just tell your websites? Okay.
Sure. Yes. You can find me at www.briaburton.com.
Charles?
I have two websites and one connects to the other. My main website is cornell-sci-fi.com and also charlesacornell.com, and it'll go straight there. On my website, I have different pages for different genres that I write. So there's a steampunk one, and if you're interested in any of the other kinds of things that I write, you can browse around quite easily there.
Okay. Now?
My website is www.landrewspat.com.
Okay. And Ken? Ken, are you there? We lost Ken. I don't know. Anyway, I'm going to go. I'm going to sign off now. And I am heading out into my world, taking off in the Starship Joy on Paper. Thank you all for joining me today. It's been fun talking to you and listening to your wonderful stories. Bye-bye now.
Thank you very much, Patsy. Appreciate it.
Hey, Patsy.
Well, you're welcome. Well, that was fun. Oh, and I did enjoy that tortoise. It is just so fantastic. Lucille Lost is written by Margaret George, and it's about her tortoise. And I think you will enjoy the book. And it's a wonderful book for children. So I just wanted to mention that. And again, I want to ask everyone if you would just subscribe to this channel, because it isn't very, what's happening here with authors. It's difficult with the social media and with everything that they have to do nowadays. It is very difficult for them to place themselves in a position where they can be seen and heard. And I wanted to do this program. I did 9 years on the radio, and the radio program is still going strong. But I also wanted to make sure that people could see the authors and realize these are real people with real passions and love of writing. Could you hear that joy that they got in discussing where they got story ideas? It's fantastic. And this Alvarium experiment and all of the books in this series are fascinating. Certainly there's one for everybody. And I hope that you will check them out, get some of the stories, get some of the books, give them as gifts. They're wonderful, wonderful books. And I think what's most important is the joy. I named this program Joy on Paper Live, because it is for writers and for those who dream of writing. And if you're one of those dreamers, let me know. If I can help you, I will help you. But it's also because I want to know the stories behind the books. I want everybody to find out, find new authors that you haven't read before, to get that same passion that authors get when they are writing. And so I hope that you will get that and that you will see that. It's lots of fun. And if you have an author who you want to recommend, somebody that changed your life, perhaps somebody whose book just touched the right chord at the right time, whether it's a cozy mystery that you were reading one day, perhaps when somebody was in the hospital and you needed something just to calm you down, or if it was a memoir that touched the chord that needed to be strung in your heart, something so close to your heart. There's a book out there for everybody, and I hope that you will find your book. And you can start with these wonderful authors. And then if you have an author, just recommend it. Just send me an email, send me a comment in the comment box below, and I will be happy to invite an author just for you. And coming up next week will be the frugal book promoter, Carolyn Howard Johnson, and she will be giving us a lesson on how to save money and time by reading her book and discovering, all the things that she's discovered over the years. She is not just an author, a poet, a marketing expert. She's also a wonderful person. So I hope that you will join us for that when we have that next week. And I'm also going to have another book buzz for kids from Devon Miller, because I love his book buzzes, and we want to promote books for kids.